Hello and welcome to the review for the PNSO Scientific Art Spinosaurus, or Essien the Spinosaurus. This is a fairly highly anticipated model. It's very well made. I have a lot of nice things to say about it, but we're going to throw it aside, and we're going to look at the base first, because the base is also very well made. A lot of manufacturers tend to leave the base at just something for the model to stand on, but PNSO is putting a lot of just lovely, thoughtful craftsmanship into their bases. And this one is no exception. You can see very nicely done footprints. The overall just texture of like the wet sand and mud is really nice to look at. Lots of great different sort of shades of paint being blended together. It's not just left unpainted, tan plastic like some companies tend to do. Great little sculpted texturing. You can see all these little like wavy lines of wet sand coming down here. Great uses of staining and blending and some really nice dry brushing on the top. So the main centerpiece of this base is, as you can see, this large Anka Priestess corpse. Lots of wonderful little wounds. I love how the dorsal fin is just sort of slumped over the back and the fins are kind of wilting. Nice little claw marks you can see there. This very large wound on the tail with a very distinct puncture mark from a claw. One of my favorite details is the fact that the snout has been broken off at the skull. That is quite violent, actually. You can see it's just been split off right where it attaches to the face. This poor fella. So let's bring in the actual Spinosaurus. So right off the bat, this is just a very beautiful model to look at. The overall pose is just very fluid, very dynamic. Lots of great sort of, believable, lifelike movement and motion captured. A lot of good size has been captured. There's something about the way it's been sculpted. It really looks like a small figure of a large animal with a lot of weight to carry. Very believable overall. And the way the limbs have been placed, all the bits of musculature and folding and stretching skin are wonderful. It looks great from pretty much every angle. Some poses can look good from one angle and then awkward from another, but this one just looks good pretty much from a 360-degree view around the actual piece. So very, very nice work indeed. In terms of paint is something we should talk about. Because there's a tiny bit of controversy with it, actually. So, essentially, the issue is, and this is not specific to this figure, this is somewhat of a precedent for PNSO's larger statues and such. Basically, the colors of this model, on the promotional art and on the box art, the promo images and such, mostly the same colors, but much more vibrant. I know there's some reasons behind it which I won't get into in this video. For me, it doesn't bother me too much. With this figure specifically, it mostly doesn't bother me just because I still really like the way the colors look on the actual production model itself. They're duller, they're desaturated, but I think they still work well. Specifically, the color on the sail is really nice looking to me. I know it's not as vibrant, not as bright as it looked in the promotional images, but you've still got a very nice contrast between most of the animal being done in cooler colors and the sail being warmer. Probably the biggest thing that this figure is missing from the promotional images is that there was more blue going around sort of the tops of the vertebrae all the way down to the tail paddle, and that's not really present here. There's still a bit of blue on the feet and hands actually, but not up here, and it's not nearly as saturated or as noticeable. But as far as other compliments to the paint job, I mean, just look at this. This is so nuanced and subtle. There's a lot of great blending of different shades of paint. I'm bumping my tripod like a pro. From a distance, it just kind of looks green. But then you get up close and you can see, like, just on the thigh here. This is an example for the whole figure. You can see a warmer brown being sort of dry brushed over here. Some darker greens. We get to a lighter green over the ribs. You can see the minty green poking through here. The entire figure has been washed in this kind of mint green. And it's seeped into the cracks of the scalation so that essentially the effect it has is that the valleys of the texture are lighter than the peaks of the texture, and it just brings out the sculpt work so wonderfully. Sometimes paint can end up sort of obscuring the detail work on the sculpt, but in this case it just complements it perfectly. And as you can see, we get to a lighter sort of gray on the underside with some beautifully sculpted scalation. You can see the bluish color on the feet and on the forearms and hands as well. One massive compliment I have for this figure's paintwork is in terms of the finer details on the head specifically. The things like the claws and such have all been painted very well, but the claws are fairly big. To me, the most impressive part is the work on the head, which I'll bring up now, and hopefully I can show it off well. If my camera will focus, there you go. The eye. I can't tell if it's been painted this way or if it's a decal. If it's been painted this way, that's very impressive. If it's a decal, that's slightly less impressive, but it still looks wonderful. You can see it's actually fading from a bit of a yellowish green on top to more of an orange on bottom with, a little black pupil in the middle there. Just wonderful little nuance and variation to it. It could have just been a monocolor sort of iris behind the pupil, but no, they gave it a little bit more sort of intrigue and interest, and it's just, oh, I love that. The eyes are very precisely done. They have a lot of great life to them. You can see the orange paint from the crest is bleeding a bit on this side of the head. It's not too bad on the other side here. The actual color is very wonderful. I really love the way that contrasts the rest of the body. Just a very nice, vibrant, bright orange. That's about the one part of the color scheme that is just as saturated in person as it was in the box art and such. You can see the teeth have been very well painted with sort of a beige, whitish color. The interior of the mouth looks good with a nice tongue, some good sort of shading and variation to the color on the cheeks there, if you would call those cheeks. I've always called those cheeks. I think they're cheeks. The roof of the mouth is well done as well. The eyes and the mouth interior have a lovely gloss, adds some nice sort of lifelike quality to it, as if they are actually wet. One of my favorite little paint details on the face as well is you can see a bit of blood on the teeth, and you can see it kind of fading up onto the sort of the side of the head as well. It's actually more prominent on the other side. Yeah, I love that because not only does it look interesting, it really incorporates the base into the piece even more. They could have just, left the Anka Priestess corpse as kind of a nice little detail, but this way, they're basically showing that the animal has actually been feeding on it, or at least has just bitten into it a bit. And that's really nice. It really sort of relates the animal to the base and connects them together and makes it sort of one coherent piece. Oh, and as well, there's actually more blood on the claws. Yeah, you can see a bit. Oh, you can see it there. Yeah, just a little bit. It's not too noticeable, and I think it's good. They could have gone overboard with that fairly easily, but as it is, I think it's very well done. As far as the overall, shaping of the sculpt is concerned, we've talked a lot about paint, but I kind of want to get back to the sculpt work. Just the overall shaping of the limbs, of the sail, the head sculpt, all looks beautiful. But by far my favorite part of the sculpt work is the actual scalation. So many figures, I feel like, have really wonderfully sculpted scales. I can think of many examples from plenty of companies. Wonderfully sculpted scales, very small, very, very well done in terms of the detail work, but they're overly uniform. And this is just not the case on this model at all. You could have easily made this figure kind of boring looking and overly clean looking if you had given it very nicely sculpted scales that were just the same size and shape all over the entire body. But as you can see, there's tons of wonderful variation and purposeful imperfection to the actual scales. This just looks wonderful. It looks so much more kind of aged and lifelike, like there's a history behind this individual. He's sustained injuries. He's got these little gnarly spikes going along the tail and the sail and everything. I love the way all these gnarled little spikes and bumps look. That's fantastic. Again, it adds kind of a bit more of a story to it, adds some nice sort of aging and weathering to the whole thing. And if you just look at any given area, you can see so much variation in the size and shape of the scales and the way the skin texture has been done. It's just really fantastic work, in my opinion. You can see this larger sort of line of scoots extending back down the neck from behind the orbit. You can see larger scoots on the toes, and also these really large kind of gnarled armor-like scoots on the forearm. Those look wonderful. They've been done on the other side equally well. One small issue is that this is one of many figures from many companies that has, of course, the larger scales on the fingers and the toes, the digits of all the limbs. The reason birds have these larger scoots is because they've actually evolved from flight feathers back into scales. So to include these somewhat implies that Spinosaurus had a distant ancestor which had flight feathers on its feet, which as far as we know it did not. But they could have evolved convergently, and there's not really much of a precedent set for not including these. Almost all companies make this mistake from time to time, or more commonly all the time. So I'm not particularly bothered by it here. Just something to mention. Oh, I love how they've actually, you can see the vertebrae of the sail have been highlighted by these larger scoots going up, and you can see the vertebrae continuing to be highlighted all the way down to the tail paddle, to actually show that the paddle on the end of the tail is also supported by extended vertebrae. Wonderful little anatomical detail. I love that they designed it like that. As far as accuracy is concerned, we mentioned the scales on the digits, but there are a few other minor anatomical blunders to talk about. Nothing too bad, but, well, first of all, this figure is very, very thin. We can see the ribs, the limbs are quite thin, the sail appears to be a very thin, delicate structure. So this figure is certainly too gracile. It looks to be a bit underweight, a bit underfed. You certainly shouldn't see the ribs, and also the skull openings should not be so depressed. Another issue is actually the shape of the skull. The way the skull has been designed appears to be, it appears as though they used as reference an outdated restoration of Spinosaurus's skull. There is a newer reconstruction that mostly just shows the back to be a bit thicker and, well, actually, mostly it just shows, you know, obviously it starts a bit thicker and then narrows as the snout extends. The newer restoration basically shows a more gradual tapering, so the whole skull is just a bit less thin. It's not too bad. If people had not pointed it out, I probably wouldn't have noticed it, and it's still relatively close to what it should be. The final issue to talk about is one that I find borderline comedic, because I just don't know why they made the decision to do this. They've placed the third finger so much higher up on the hand than the other two fingers. It's not so bad on this hand, but it's really noticeable on this one. It looks like he has opposable thumbs, and I don't know why. No theropod dinosaur had fingers structured like this. I really don't know where they got the idea to do this, and it just looks very strange. Another minor anatomical note is that there is no cloaca. But plenty of companies never include a cloaca just as a matter of course, so I view that more as just a little creative decision and not much of a real concrete anatomical issue. And in terms of the anatomy overall, I mean, with the 2014 study still to this day being put under plenty of healthy questioning, it's hard to really determine what the overall shape and bodily proportions of Spinosaurus should be, but I think for our current knowledge and the current fossil material available, I think PNSO has done a very good job. There's a handful of questionable things and one very interesting artistic decision, but other than that, I really, for the most part, think that this is one of the more accurate Spinosaurus restorations in model form available, actually. Oh, a quick note on quality control. There are a couple spines that have been bent over. This little spine here is somewhat crooked. It's sort of bent over. And also this large spine on the sort of back of the neck behind the head has been bent over a bit. Not too big of a deal, and because this restoration of the animal has a particularly kind of gnarled, aged appearance with lots of little spines and bumps, it's not very noticeable. So overall, despite the fact that, again, technically speaking, this is not a perfect figure, I think that the few issues that it has are, for me anyway, sort of overridden by the positives. It's a very well-made, very beautiful piece, and I'm going to be giving this one a 10 out of 10 for me anyway. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all next time. This model is highly recommended from me. Real quick, I totally forgot size comparisons because I'm super good at my job. Here's the Papualosaurus. This Spinosaurus is marketed at 135 scale. It's probably closer to 130. It is quite large and impressive indeed. But because it's representing such a large and impressive genus, I think the size, in my opinion at least, is appropriate enough. Also, this figure does feature an articulated jaw. It's made of a very rubbery material as opposed to the hard PVC of the rest of the model, so it fits into the upper jaw extremely well, and all the teeth can interlock very nicely. Mine is a tad loose, but it's not too bad. A lot of people show some serious gaps where the jaw actually connects to the head sculpt, but mine is not too bad at all, as you can see. Overall, I'd say the jaw has been well designed for what it is. And that, I think, is everything I have to say about the PNSO Scientific Art Spinosaurus.